Holding the catalogue up, here it is. I think the colours are rather lovely. I don't know if Peter Riddler is here, but blue and gold. We're by Swansea. We're Swansea by sea, the blue, and the gold. 50 years of the attic. I'm going to say a few words. For those of you that know me, will realise a few may become many, but I will curtail myself given the fact that although it's allegedly summer outside, it's certainly summer in here with all of us. I'm going to talk about the early years, so I'm here to introduce the exhibition and the publication. So I'm going to talk about the early years of the gallery, and then I'll be handing over to Howard, who will formally open the exhibition. Here we are then in July, as I said, allegedly, July 2012. It's 50 years since this gallery came into existence. But it wasn't, first of all, known as the attic, it was known as the Dillwyn. And that, of course, then was in July 1962. Now, just to sort of set the scene for you a bit, I don't know if any of you saw today's Western Mail, but it mentioned how in July 1962, the Rolling Stones first performed. So, as Mick Jagger has said, that seems an awfully long time ago. So the 60s was another place, to paraphrase others. It was another place. It was the decade when a lot of people thought anything was possible. It was the decade that a certain president of America, who was to be shot, of course, a few years later, said that we will get a man on the moon before the end of the 60s, and they did. I refer, of course, to President Kennedy. 1962 also was the first year of the Beatles' first hit. Anyone know what that was? The first... Yeah, Love Me Do. Love Me Do. Love Me Do. 1962 also, if you were looking at Vogue magazine, you'd have seen the wonderful new world of Mary Quant and the miniskirt. Yeah. Very daring. I'm just wondering whether at that first opening of the attic, which was, as I said, then the Dillwyn Gallery, whether there are any miniskirts in evidence. Maybe some of you will be able to tell me afterwards whether they were.
Glenys is nodding.
I wasn't.
Glenys and Pauline, two ladies down the front here who have long connections, tell me that is true. There were miniskirts in Swansea. So something remarkable was happening here in the early 60s. It wasn't just fashion, it wasn't just music, it wasn't just this feeling that anything was possible. It was the first independent art gallery, either in Swansea or southwest Wales. And now the attic is the longest running independent art gallery in Wales, 50 years. So I think that deserves recognition. Just to sort of set the scene a bit more for you, really, from here on, I'm sort of talking about things in what have appeared to become clusters of three. And the first three are the three founders of the Dillwyn Gallery. And I'm delighted that one of the three founders is at the front here with me now, Brenda Bloxham. Brenda in the lovely, beautifully coloured dress here. Brenda, along with the late Margaret Aaron Thomas, who sadly died only a month or so ago, and Mrs. Dorothy Leonard Thomas, who died a few years ago, the three of them founded the gallery. And it was a brave thing to do, so that at the time, Winfred Vaughan Thomas, that great voice and personality of Wales in the 60s, described the three of them as the three lady adventurers. And the adventure continues. So really, the 60s was, I mentioned Mary Quant and the miniskirt, it was also about the emergence of entrepreneurial women here in Swansea, people like Brenda Bloxham, Margaret Aaron Thomas and Dorothy Leonard Thomas. And also in the 60s, elsewhere in Swansea, we were finding that the Glyn Vivian Gallery had its first female curator. Would anyone know that name? John? The first lady, first woman curator of the Glyn Vivian. Before Robin, it was Kathleen Armistead in the 1960s. Some of you may remember her. So that's the first three, the three ladies that set this gallery up. I say this gallery, of course, it wasn't on this site. And again, another three for you is the gallery's moved 3 times in its history. It began in Wine Street. It's also come down to earth. It began up at one point in an attic in Wine Street. It then came down a bit to a first floor in Cambrian Place. elsewhere here in the marina, and now it's down at ground level, an attic at ground level, there's a lovely idea, here in Pockets Wharf. But in a way, these three ladies were part of a tradition, and it's only now perhaps as we look back that we realise that, part of a tradition of Swansea as a pioneering place. Swansea, perhaps we forget that for those of us that live here, and I guess many of you do, although on my way in I met people who'd come from as far afield as East Sussex. So perhaps for the benefit of those as well, you know, I need to remind us how pioneering Swansea is. It pioneered the world. This was Copperopolis. This was the place in the world, and it's virtually all vanished, that now, the evidence of that, but not completely. Also, Swansea School of Art and Crafts, as it was originally called, the oldest art school in Wales, 1853. So it's over 150 years old. William Gladstone opened its new premises opposite the present Glenvivian in the 1880s as well. And by the time that the Glenvivian opens, I've already mentioned that, you have this incredible Scot called William Grant Murray, who I refer to in the catalogue as well, who obviously, with a name like that, came from elsewhere. He was Scottish, but you know, it was he that really inspired the artists, amongst whom were people like Alfred Janes, who then first exhibited in the Dillwyn. So people like Ceri Richards and Evan Walters, Vincent Evans, Alfred Janes, they emerged because of this exceptional art school, the exceptional ensemble, really, of what was pioneering Swansea. And it was these artists, particularly people like Fred Janes in the 1930s, painting as a young man, that was part of what Vernon Watkins identified as a new tradition. He described it as a kind of a new old master tradition. He was tentative when he said this in 1962. That's the very year this gallery opened. He said it in an article published in The Listener. He says, it seems that in Swansea, since the 1930s, we are witnessing the start of a new tradition in Wales in the 1930s. And the reason, when I was planning this talk, that I asked David and Sandy I could stand here, it's so that as I talk, I can look at a beautiful, if you haven't seen it yet, all of you, do go and look, a beautiful jewel-like Alfred Janes from the 1930s called Two Herrings. It's just there. Beautiful picture from a private collection. What did Watkins mean saying in 1962 that there was this new tradition? Well, the way I've written about it elsewhere, apart from this latest publication, is what exactly they were doing in their 1930s work. And I said they. So Fred Janes was developing what I call a modular system. If you look at that painting, he's looking at the structure of the scales of the herring and developing a modular system. This is quite really avant-garde for 1930s paintings. His friend Dylan Thomas, who you may have heard of, was also developing new structural systems in his poems and was designing poems in a kind of diamond shape. So again, that sort of diamond shape that reflects perhaps those scales of the fish. And similarly, Daniel Jones, who was an early patron of the Attic and the Dillwyn, was doing the same thing in the 30s in music, and he called this complex meter. For those of you that have heard Jones's music, say, in the Brangwyn, will have perhaps been aware, consciously or subconsciously, of that structure, complex meter. So what combined them all, the world of painting, the world of music, and the world of poetry in that 30s, was this sense of experiment and of, if you like, rhythm. And I think rhythm is appropriate in Swansea because we live by the sea. You know, there are these rhythms there all the time. So people like Fred Janes was in the very first exhibition in 1962. And there was another three for you. Dylan Thomas, Fred Janes, Daniel Jones, another little trio for you, another three. By the 1960s then, there was great ambition here, and this feeling, as I said, that anything could be done. A whole series of other artists emerged as well. I could hear someone next to me saying Glenys. I've mentioned Glenys already. I'm delighted that three artists who exhibited here in 1962 are exhibiting here again in 2012, and they are Glenys, of course, Glenys Core. They are George Little, who's also here tonight, and Gordon Stewart, who I think is possibly not here tonight. But Gordon, Glenys, and George found their feet in a way. The Glenvivian, but also the attic, the Dillwyn, helped them find their direction. Right, the last trio for you is the 3 early venues that the ambitious Dillwyn Gallery decided to exhibit in. So they were not, these 3 ladies were not just content in showing here in Swansea. They had greater ambitions. As I said, the 60s was the decade of possibilities. So in 1963, a year after they'd opened, they showed in Cambridge. And that was thanks largely to also the help of Kingsley Amis, who'd lived in Swansea and of course had now transferred to Cambridge. The following year they showed in London. These are group shows, the Arts Council wasn't doing anything quite like this. No other gallery in Wales was doing anything like this. It was exceptional. So they go to London in 1964 to the Qantas Gallery. Keith Joseph, who's a name of yesteryear, you may remember, was at that event. Winford Vaughan Thomas again, Kerry Richards. It was a major achievement again. The year after, again, the sky's the limit. I've mentioned President Kennedy. In 1965, the attic, as I said, then the Dillwyn, goes to Washington DC, to the Jefferson Place Gallery. Tremendous achievement. Superb. That's a kind of brief overview for you then. So we have Swansea talent that is exhibited here in Swansea for 50 years and Swansea talent that's been exported literally elsewhere. I'm going to hand over to Howard now. Howard has, as we were walking in together, reminded me that he's known the gallery for a lot longer. So my direct contact with the gallery has been since the 1990s. So I just about remember the 3 venues, Wine Street, Cambrian and here. But Howard tells me that he remembers it from the 1970s. But very last thing before I hand over, I'd like to formally thank Brenda, who 5 years ago was brave enough to appear on stage with me in the Dylan Thomas Centre when we did an attic gallery at 45. I'd like to thank David and Sandy, who are next to me, who were very patient in what was quite a fast process to put the publication together, and quite a challenging one. And I'd like to thank Sandy's sister, Elizabeth, who I haven't met yet. Right, I'm looking at you, Elizabeth. I'm looking at Elizabeth and thanking her for her help as well. But of course, lastly, thanks to all of you. The artists, the 3 lady adventurers, none of this would have been possible without you. This is what it's about. It's about, you are the oxygen, if you like. You are what is needed to make it all happen. So thank you all very much for coming tonight and for supporting the gallery over many years. Thank you.